podcast is a production of Widener Law Commonwealth in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. For more information, visit commonwealthlaw.widener.edu/podcast. Now here's your host, Julie Sheldon.
Welcome to the Widener Law Commonwealth podcast. Today we have with us Commonwealth Professor of Law and Government, Jill Family. She's also the director of our Law and Government Institute. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So recently, I want to jump kind of right in. Recently, you were a co-signer on a letter to the Attorney General of the United States about quotas for immigration judges. Can you give me an overview of that letter?
Sure. So I, with another law professor, drafted this letter that eventually over 120 law professors signed that really expressed our dismay at the Attorney General Sessions' plans to implement quotas for immigration judges. So immigration judges are attorneys who work for the Department of Justice, and they decide whether or not individual foreign nationals will be deported from the United States. And they are very busy. They have there's not enough immigration judges, and as the government through the Trump administration, through the Obama administration, through the Bush administration before that, as the government has really ramped up in immigration enforcement efforts, they've been pumping a lot of money into the parts of government that go out and find the people to deport, but they haven't been adequately funding the adjudication system, the system that provides the due process and decides whether or not people should be removed. So immigration judges are swamped. They now have a backlog of over 700,000 cases, which is just insanity.
That's a lot.
And people are waiting years for a hearing. And so the Department of Justice has been hiring more judges, but the problem is a lot of the judges are retiring too. So we really haven't reached that critical mass yet. We haven't had sort of the huge amount of hiring that we really need. And instead of that, one of the things Attorney General Sessions is proposing is these quotas for immigration judges. And so that's what the letter is about.
Okay. So I have that kind of leads me into a couple of additional questions. So I know you mentioned that, some judges are retiring. We haven't really filled the void there. Is there a shortage of immigration judges, or is it just that we haven't filled that void at all?
It's just that the resources aren't there.
Okay.
I mean, every time they advertise to hire, lots of people apply for the position. It's just the resources aren't there to hire the number of judges. So if you have the system that has this huge amount of backlog, one potential solution is you could say, all right, well, we need more adjudicators. We need more people that can hear these kinds of cases. And so the Department of Justice is doing a little bit of that, but also they're doing a bunch of things that myself and a bunch of other law professors are really worried about because they really threaten fairness. They really don't recognize that fair procedures are super important, and they sort of, chip away at the idea that a fundamental component of democracy is that we provide fair procedures for people.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that it could be years before somebody who is detained gets their fair time and has their fair procedure. Are they waiting in a detention center then for this amount of time?
So some people are, although the detained cases do tend to move faster than the non-detained cases.
Okay.
But they're still waiting in detention, and most of the time immigration detention looks no different than, jail. And in fact, we're sitting here in Harrisburg, and the York County Prison, which is just a regular prison, is one of the federal government's big immigration detention hubs for the Northeast. So you have immigrants who are awaiting a hearing in York, and they're in the York County Prison, just like someone who was arrested on a criminal offense.
Okay. And that means then that they're possibly separated from their families. They don't have access to certain amenities that they, would be used to having, correct?
They're separated from their families, and most detention centers are in really remote areas. The York facility is actually one of the least isolated facilities, but a lot of them are really in the middle of nowhere, and there just aren't a lot of immigration lawyers to help. And so I think the statistic is 80-some% of foreign nationals who are detained during their removal proceedings don't have a lawyer. So you have people who aren't represented, and the signals that we're getting from the Department of Justice is that they're mainly just interested in making these hearings go as quickly as possible. And that's just a really bad fit, because if you have a situation where you have someone who needs a hearing, and by the way, they're protected by the Constitution because the Due Process Clause protects all persons. It doesn't just protect citizens. So if you have someone who needs a hearing, the immigration law is really complicated. I think it's more complicated than tax law, although some tax lawyers may challenge
There's a
me
little
on
debate
that.
there, right?
Yeah. So it's not like the law is real simple to apply. Many of the cases are asylum cases where, a person has some really serious and hard things to share with the immigration judge. They're asking to be protected from persecution back home. It could be torture, it could be sexual abuse. It's things that aren't so easy to chat about. So it can take some time to sort of elicit that testimony from the person. And you're dealing with individuals who, may not have an education much past primary school, maybe high school level, and their first language is not English. And most of them don't have lawyers. So you're sort of taking a situation like that and telling the immigration judges, oh, you just have to move faster. And there's no way they can move faster and still provide a fair hearing.
Absolutely. I would think, for me, it's hard enough to understand the law, and I'm, English is my native language. So, to be able to understand that, I think would be incredibly difficult, the entire process as you're in a different country, to move through that. So
right. And I should add that even kids don't have a right to an attorney. Actually, I should back up a second. No one has a right to government-funded lawyers in immigration court because it's a civil proceeding. It's not criminal. So it's not like in a criminal case where you are assigned a public defender if you can't afford an attorney. So you can hire your own attorney, but if you can't find one or you can't afford one, there's no attorney assigned to you. And that even applies to kids. And so there are some kids who are going through removal proceedings by themselves. And
it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, and they don't have anyone to advocate for them. And I actually just saw a news story recently that a nonprofit just made a coloring book to try to explain to kids, like, at least some basics about, here's the immigration judge. You can color the immigration judge. And, on the one hand, it's great that they're trying, but it's ridiculous that we think that, a kid is going to understand through a coloring book, the complexities of immigration law. I offer a whole course in immigration law to law students, and they find it difficult. I sometimes still find immigration law difficult, so it's sort of ludicrous.
Now, have you had any response from the AG? From the letter? I mean, I know that you've gotten some press from that and gotten some foothold on it. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, nothing directly from the Department of Justice itself, but I know a lot of advocacy organizations and some media organizations have picked up on the letter. And this is something that's going to be ongoing because the quotas are scheduled to take effect on October 1st. And so hopefully Attorney General Sessions will change his mind or at least make some changes to the quotas. For example, right now, as far as we know, the quotas don't include any case weighting. And what that means is, each case doesn't take the same amount of time to process as the next. So right now, the way the quotas are written is everyone has to finish 700 cases. Well, what if one immigration judge for his 700, has 600 really easy ones and 100 hard ones, and another immigration judge has 600 really complicated cases and 100 easy ones? It doesn't seem like a fair way. You're not really comparing apples to apples. And case weighting gets complicated, and basically what you do is you list every potential kind of scenario an immigration judge could encounter, and you weight it. So if somebody has an asylum claim, that would count more towards the 700 than, someone who has a case where, the charge is that the person entered without permission and they're not a U.S. citizen and they don't have any defenses and they're just going to be removed. So, I don't think anyone objects to performance metrics for judges as a concept, but the way that these are meant to be implicated, along with some other actions of the Attorney General, it seems like they just want to provide sort of a facade of due process without actually providing the fair proceeding.
Well, and I would, 700 cases, that's a year. That's almost 2 cases a day finished and wrapped up. The one time that I did go to proceedings, that seems nearly impossible to me, because you have so many ongoing cases and some have glitches and some can't get an attorney and for representation. And that just seems like an outlandish number to be able to open, finish, close 2 cases on average a day, not taking into account weekends, holidays, anything else.
Yeah, so. And additionally, the Attorney General has taken some actions, taken away some docket management tools. So he's told the immigration judges that they should be more hesitant to grant continuances, and also really restricting their ability to use a technique called administrative closure, where they would close out a case that was pending before them because they knew they were waiting for something down the line that would probably make the case go away. So that's why I say it's not just the quotas in a vacuum. It's these other actions that clearly we're getting a signal that, the administration as a whole is not a big fan of immigration. And then in the removal process, they're just looking to speed things up as much as possible.
And now, for the letter, how did you get other immigration professors on board? How did you spread the word about that?
Oh, sure. So there's a email listserv of immigration professors, and so we sent the draft of the letter there, and also to administrative law professors, because administrative law professors are also concerned about this, because immigration law is sort of one type of administrative law. So professors who are just concerned generally about agency adjudication signed on as well.
Okay. And, we talked a little bit about the detrimental effect this could have on the immigration process, but I would even think that long-term this could even cause a larger backlog as we're trying to kind of rush through it, or things will be missed. People will be missed and fall through the cracks with this.
Yeah, I think
more so than they are now.
Right. A couple of things. I think the intent is to make the process move faster, but we've seen in the past that there really is no substitute to just providing more adjudicators, because every time in the past, and I think will happen here, you're right, there's sort of unintended consequences. First of all, no doubt someone will sue challenging the quotas that they violate due process, so there'll be litigation about that. Also, I think what will probably happen is people won't feel like they got a fair day in court at the immigration judge level. So we'll probably see more appeals. So that just sort of pushes the work off somewhere else. So I think that's an accurate observation. I think this isn't going to completely solve any problem. It's just going to provide less fair procedures and create some other problem somewhere else.
Okay. And now kind of one of my last questions is, even if the backlog is so large, even if these quotas were instituted and things were to move along, is there ever a chance that it just seems like it wouldn't even begin to kind of chip away at that sort of issue?
Yeah, I think really the only solution is a lot more adjudicators, and also Congress getting back to thinking about comprehensive immigration reform, in thinking about if some of the people who are eligible to be removed, if we want to provide some sort of path to legalization for them. And also, we should remember that this problem isn't just of the making of the immigration judges. It's actually a different federal agency, the Department of Homeland Security, that decides who to put into removal hearings. So immigration judges don't control their own dockets. Some other federal agency actors decide who they're going to put into the system. And so in the past, the Department of Homeland Security used more of its prosecutorial discretion to prioritize who we really wanted to focus on in terms of immigration enforcement. But the current administration has just decided that there really are no priorities, that everyone's a priority for removal. So that means we have even more people who are being pushed into the process.
That was my next question, is if there has been a significant increase with this administration as we have seen more action in the immigration area.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest differences is under the Obama administration, there were laid out priorities for who Immigration and Customs Enforcement should focus on in terms of arresting people and putting them into immigration proceedings. And the Trump administration replaced that guidance with a memo that basically says you should arrest everyone you encounter. Everyone's a priority for removal. And I should also say, though, that at the same time that the Department of Justice is trying to figure out sort of ways to shortchange the immigration judge hearing process, the administration is also pursuing ways to remove people that even provide less process, or they're trying to keep people out of the immigration removal system at all. So, for example, there have been news stories that the Border Patrol has been trying to discourage people from even applying for asylum at the border. And if they don't ever apply, then they're never going to be put into the immigration adjudication system.
Now, I know that every case is different when it comes to this, but is there an average amount of time that somebody may be in detention, or somebody who may be going through this process, whether it's a child or a family or an individual? Is there an amount of time that, say, it's 2 months to a year, or does it vary for everyone?
Yeah, I think it really varies. It depends where you're detained. It depends on the situation. I mean, it's not uncommon for people to be in immigration detention for months, if not in some cases years. And and that's not even getting into, we could have a whole separate podcast on the whole family separation issue and detaining children and that sort of thing is a whole other issue.
Okay. So I usually like to end with a little more of a personal question. Mm-hmm. What sparked your interest in immigration law? What made you want to do this?
So when I was in law school, I was working in the summer at a firm that did some immigration work, and I tried an assignment because it just seemed appealing to me in that it was dealing with people and people from all over the world and different cultures. And I tried the assignment and I just loved it for those reasons. And then sort of my interest in it grew as I learned more about immigration law and realized that it's really the one area of the law where historically we've sort of let the government off the hook and not held them up to the standards that we require in other areas of the law. And that's just always seemed fundamentally unfair to me. Like, just because you happen to be born in another country, that you're somehow less entitled to civil rights or human rights. And so that's what's really driven me.
Fantastic. Well, Professor Family, thank you so much for joining us today on our podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And thanks to our listeners today for listening, and also keep an eye out for our next podcast.
Widener University Commonwealth Law School is the Pennsylvania capital's only law school, with 3 specialized centers of legal scholarship through its Law and Government Institute, Environmental Law and Sustainability Center, and Business Advising Program. Widener Law Commonwealth offers an exceptional learning experience that is personal, practical, and professional. Visit commonwealthlaw.widener.edu for more information.